Hey, before we settle in, tell me what time it is where you're watching from. Which country are you in right now? If you enjoy slow history like this, you can tap like, maybe subscribe, and leave a quiet comment for me to read later. I really do read them, and it makes these long nights feel less empty. Alright, let's begin. Picture this very slowly. The sea is calm on the surface, almost polite. The sails above are barely moving. But below your feet, under thick wooden planks darkened by salt and age, life is happening in a way most people never imagine. This is where pirates truly lived. Not in shouting battles or bright sunsets, but down here below deck, where the air barely moves and the light almost gives up. Step down the ladder with me. Each rung is slick from years of bare feet, rainwater, spilled grog and sweat. The smell hits first. It's not one smell, but many layered together. Old wood soaked with seawater, unwashed bodies, smoke from lamps, sour food, and something faintly rotten that no one can quite identify anymore. This is the world pirates spent most of their lives in. Not above deck. Here. Below deck was low. So low that most men could not stand upright. Beams ran across the ceiling like the ribs of a living creature, forcing sailors to bend their necks every time they moved. Over months and years, backs curved, shoulders hunched, and bodies adapted to this constant bowing. You learned to walk crouched, even when you didn't need to anymore. The floor was never truly dry. Water seeped through seams in the hull, collected in shallow pools, and mixed with dirt and grease. Rats moved freely, completely unafraid of humans. They lived here too, nesting in corners, gnawing on rope, leather, and sometimes the dead. Pirates rarely bothered chasing them away. Rats were a sign the ship still floated. When rats began to leave, sailors grew afraid. Light came from small oil lamps or candles, carefully rationed. Fire was dangerous on a wooden ship, so darkness was the safer companion. During the day, thin rays of sunlight slipped through cracks in the deck above, cutting the gloom into narrow stripes. Dust floated in those beams, drifting slowly like the ship itself was breathing. This space was crowded. A pirate ship might carry 100 men or more, and below deck they were packed tightly together. There were no private rooms, no personal space, just bodies sharing air, heat, and noise. When the sea was rough, men were thrown against one another, bruises forming without anyone remembering how they got them. Sleeping was not rest, it was survival. Pirates slept in hammocks slung from beams, swaying constantly with the motion of the ship. Hammocks kept men off the wet floor and allowed more bodies to fit into less space. You learned how to sleep while swinging, your body moving with the ship like a pendulum. First it made new sailors sick. Later it became impossible to sleep without that motion. Blankets were thin, often damp. Clothing was worn day and night. There was no changing into something clean. Salt stiffened fabric. Lice lived in seams. Fleas bit constantly. Scratching was normal. Bleeding from scratching was normal. In the dark, you could hear it. The quiet sound of men scratching their skin in unison, like insects themselves. Privacy did not exist. If someone was sick, everyone knew. If someone cried, everyone heard it. Vomit during storms pooled on the floor until someone bothered to sweep it toward the bilge. The bilge. That was the lowest part of the ship, where all unwanted liquids ended up. Seawater, urine, spilled food, blood. The smell from below the bilge was thick and heavy, rising up like a warning. Eating happened below deck too when weather allowed. Food was not fresh. Could not be. Meat was salted so heavily it burned the tongue. Biscuits, hardtack, were baked until all moisture was gone. Over time, insects laid eggs inside them. Pirates knew this. They broke biscuits open and shook them, knocking out the weevils. If the ship was low on supplies, they ate them anyway. Protein was protein. Water spoiled quickly. Stored in barrels, it grew slimy and foul. Pirates drank it because they had no choice. Alcohol, rum, wine, or beer lasted longer, so it became part of daily life. Drunkenness below deck was dangerous. A careless lamp, a stumble into stored gunpowder, a fight in tight quarters. But sobriety did not make conditions easier either. Voices echoed strangely down here. A cough could travel the length of the ship. So could whispers. Rumors lived below deck. Talk of treasure. Talk of disease. Talk of punishment. Pirates were democratic compared to Navy sailors. But discipline still existed. Fights broke out over cards, over insults, over nothing at all. Knives were never far. In this cramped darkness, time felt different. Days blurred together. Without sunlight, without clear markers, pirates measured time by hunger, fatigue, and the changing sounds of the sea above. Calm seas meant quiet creaks. Storms meant groaning wood, snapping ropes, and the terrifying knowledge that only a few inches of timber stood between you and drowning. Below deck was not glamorous. It was endurance. It shaped the pirate more than any battle ever could. And as the ship sailed onward, carrying its human cargo across open water, the slow damage began. On bodies, on minds, on hope itself. Stay here with that thought for a moment. The ship keeps moving. The lamps flicker. And life below deck continues, hour after hour, day after day. As the hours passed below deck, the body learned new rules. You learned where to place your feet so you wouldn't slip. You learned which beams would crack your skull if you stood too fast. You learned how to sleep through noise that would terrify you on land. The creak of wood became a language. A sharp snap meant strain. A long groan meant the ship was fighting the sea. Silence was never comforting. Silence meant something had gone wrong. Morning did not arrive with light down here. It arrived with movement. Boots above deck. Orders shouted faintly through layers of wood. Ropes sliding, canvas shifting. The ship waking up meant you woke up too, whether you were ready or not. Hammocks were unhooked and rolled tight, stacked away to make room. Space was precious. Nothing stayed where it was for long. Breakfast, if it could be called that, was simple and repetitive. Piece of hardtack. Maybe a strip of salted meat if supplies allowed. Sometimes dried peas boiled into a thick, dull mash. It filled the stomach but gave little comfort. Teeth cracked on biscuits more often than sailors admitted. Some lost teeth early in their careers, leaving them to soften food in liquid before eating. No one laughed. It happened to everyone eventually. Eating was quick. Food did not wait. If you hesitated, someone else might take your share. Not out of cruelty but necessity. Hunger changed people quietly, made them watchful, protective. Every barrel was counted, every ration measured. Below deck, you could hear the scraping of knives against wood as men fought to get every last crumb. After eating came work. Even below deck there was always work. Rope needed coiling. Weapons needed cleaning. Powder needed checking. Barrels needed shifting as the ship's balance changed. Pirates took pride in their ship. It was not just transport. It was shelter, weapon, and coffin all in one. If the ship failed, nothing else mattered. Sweat collected quickly in the stale air. There was no breeze down here. Heat built up, especially in tropical waters. Men stripped down to bare skin, bodies slick and shining in lamplight. The smell of sweat grew sharp, mixing with old smoke and salt. Breathing felt heavy. Some men felt dizzy. Others grew short-tempered. Tempers flared faster in the heat. Illness spread easily below deck. One cough could become many. Fevers passed from hammock to hammock. There were no doctors in the modern sense. Sometimes a ship carried a barber surgeon, trained to cut hair, pull teeth, and amputate limbs. More often, pirates relied on experience and superstition. Herbs stolen from ports. Alcohol poured on wounds. Prayers whispered in the dark. Injuries were common, even without battle. Fingers crushed by shifting cargo. Feet pierced by splinters. Burns from lamps knocked over by sudden waves. A small wound could become deadly. Infection crept in quietly, turning red, then black. The smell of rot was unmistakable. When it appeared, men avoided the injured sailor. Not out of cruelty, but fear. Toilets were simple and unpleasant. There were no proper facilities below deck. Waste was collected in buckets or relieved over the side when possible. At night or during storms, Buckets were used and emptied later. Bills happened. No one complained loudly. Complaints changed nothing. Rats watched everything. They ran across sleeping men without fear. They gnawed on stored food, sometimes chewing through barrels. Pirates hated them but also respected them. Rats were survivors. Some sailors even kept them as companions, believing their instincts could warn of danger. It was not unusual to see a man quietly sharing crumbs with a rat in the corner. Conversation below deck was low and slow. Loud voices brought trouble. Words drifted through the dark. Stories of past voyages, ports filled with color and sound, women left behind, money lost as fast as it was gained. Lies mixed with truth until no one could tell them apart. Memory became flexible. Reality softened. At night, after lamps were dimmed, the ship settled into a different rhythm. The sea slapped against the hull. The ship answered with soft groans. Men climbed back into hammocks, bodies sore, skin itching, minds restless. Sleep came in pieces. Short stretches broken by dreams of falling, drowning, or endless walking on dry land. Some men talked in their sleep. Some cried out. Others lay awake, staring into darkness, counting breaths, listening for the sound of waves breaking too close. Death felt nearer below deck. Not dramatic, not heroic, just close, like a shadow pressed against the hull. And still the ship sailed on, carrying its living cargo through heat and darkness, through routine and quiet suffering. Below deck, life was not about glory. It was about lasting one more day, one more night, one more breath in stale air. The rhythm continued, slow and unchanging, and with each passing day, the men below deck became more a part of the ship itself than they realized. As days blended together below deck, the sense of time slowly unraveled. Weeks passed without clear memory of when they began. Pirates did not mark calendars down here. They mark survival. The body learned before the mind did. Muscles remembering routines even when thoughts drifted. Wake, eat, work, endure, sleep. Again, again. The sound of the sea became constant, like breathing that never stopped. Water slid along the hull in long, dragging whispers. When waves struck harder, the noise deepened, like a drum played slowly and without mercy. Below deck, you felt storms before you saw them. The ship's motion changed first. The sway became sharper. The floor tilted more suddenly. Loose objects shifted, knocking softly into one another like warning signals. During storms, below deck turned into a cage. Hatches were sealed. Darkness grew thicker. Lamps were tied down or extinguished. Men clung to beams, to ropes, to each other. Vomit soaked the floor. The smell became overwhelming. Salt, sickness, fear. Some prayed. Some cursed. Some went silent, their lips moving without sound. Water found its way in. It always did. Drips became streams. Streams became shallow floods around ankles. Men worked pumps until their arms burned, passing buckets hand to hand. No one rested. No one complained. Exhaustion was safer than stopping. The ship groaned like something alive and wounded, and below deck you felt trapped inside it, hoping its strength would outlast the sea's anger. When the storm finally passed, relief came quietly, not with cheers, just with deeper breaths. The hatches opened. Fresh air spilled down like a gift. Men lay where they were, too tired to move, letting the smell of salt and sky wash over them. Some laughed softly. Some cried without knowing why. Clothing never truly dried. Wet fabric clung to skin, causing sores that refused to heal. Salt rubbed raw patches until movement hurt. Men wrapped cloth around wounds, reused bandages until they fell apart. Pain became background noise like the creaking of the ship. You noticed it only when it changed. Skin diseases were common. Rashes bloomed and spread. Fungal infections thrived in damp darkness. Lice multiplied. Fleas bit in lines along ankles and wrists. Scratching was constant, almost rhythmic. Blood stained sleeves and blankets. No one apologized. Everyone understood. Below deck was also where punishment happened. Not often but memorably. Pirates valued freedom but order mattered. Theft of food, betrayal, cowardice. These things were not ignored. Punishments were decided by group agreement. Sometimes it was a beating. Sometimes isolation. Rarely worse. The silence during punishment was heavier than any scream. Men looked away not because they didn't care, but because they could imagine themselves there. Weapons were stored below deck too. Pistols wrapped in cloth. Cutlasses hung along beams. Gunpowder kept dry in sealed containers. Handling it required care and calm. One mistake could end everything. Fire was feared more than the sea. Fire meant panic. Fire meant no escape. Despite everything, moments of strange calm existed. Long afternoons when the ship moved smoothly and work slowed. Men sat against barrels, backs aching, eyes half closed. Someone might hum quietly. Another might tell a story he'd told a dozen times before, about a port that smelled like spices, or a woman who waited on a balcony. The details shifted each telling, but the feeling stayed the same, a longing for something solid and unmoving. Games were played when possible, cards worn thin, dice carved from bone, bets placed with promises rather than money. Winning didn't change much. Losing didn't either. Passed the time. It reminded men they were still human. Below deck also held the wounded after battle. Not every fight was glorious. Most were fast, loud, confusing. Afterwards, injured men were carried down, laid on planks or barrels. Blood soaked into wood that had absorbed centuries of it before. Limbs were stitched or cut away. Men bit on leather to keep from screaming. Alcohol dulled pain but sharpened memory. Some wounds healed. Some didn't. Some men never came back above deck. Death below deck was quiet. A body wrapped in cloth. Pause in conversation. Belongings claimed or distributed. Later, the body would be taken up and returned to the sea. But below deck, death felt close and personal. An empty hammock swayed for a while before being taken down. No speeches. Just space where someone used to be. At night, after the ship settled, thoughts grew louder. Regrets surfaced. Doubts whispered. Some men missed home fiercely. Others couldn't remember it clearly anymore. Faces blurred. Voices faded. The ship became the only world that felt real. Breathing slowed. Hammocks creaked softly. The smell of wood and salt filled lungs. And below deck, wrapped in darkness and motion, pirates slept again. Not dreaming of glory but of rest. The ship continued forward, carrying its worn, quiet lives across endless water, where tomorrow would feel exactly like today, and different all the same. Over time, below deck began to change the way a man thought. The mind adjusted just like the body did. Silence no longer meant peace. Meant waiting. Waiting for orders, for weather, for something to break the routine. In the dark, thoughts circled slowly, repeating themselves until they lost their sharp edges. Smell was the strongest memory maker down here. Long after faces faded, smells stayed clear. The sour bite of spoiled water, the thick sweetness of tar, the sharp sting of gunpowder dust. Once those smells settled into your clothes and skin, they never truly left. Even in port, standing on solid ground, some pirates swore they could still smell the ship on themselves, as if the sea had claimed them permanently. Bathing was rare. Fresh water was too valuable to waste on cleaning bodies. Sometimes sailors washed with seawater, scrubbing salt against skin until it burned. It removed surface dirt but left a sticky film behind. Hair grew long and matted. Beards thickened. Knots formed where fingers couldn't reach. Appearances stopped mattering. Comfort stopped mattering. Only function remained. Clothes were repaired endlessly. A tear was stitched. Patch sewn on top of another patch. Fabric thinned until it was almost transparent. When something could no longer be worn, it was cut up and reused. Bandages, ties, rags. Nothing was thrown away unless it had absolutely no use left. Even then, it might sit in a corner for weeks before being discarded. Below deck was where secrets lived. Letters stolen from ships. written by people who never knew pirates would read their words. Some men kept them, rereading them by lamplight, imagining other lives. Others burned them quietly, watching paper curl and blacken, careful not to let the flame grow too strong. Faith existed down here too, in many forms. Some pirates carried small charms, coins, bones, bits of cloth. Others whispered prayers learned in childhood. Not loudly, quietly, so no one could mock them. Superstitions ruled daily behavior. Whistling below deck was avoided. Certain words were never spoken. Some believed the ship itself could hear and respond. Dreams became vivid. The constant motion of the sea seeped into sleep. Men dreamed of falling, of being crushed, of endless walking through shallow water. Sometimes they dreamed of home, but the details were wrong. Streets bent strangely. Faces lacked eyes. Waking up felt disorienting, like being dropped into a body that didn't quite fit anymore. Noise traveled in strange ways. A whispered argument at one end of the ship could be heard clearly at the other. Laughter echoed too loudly. Crying could not be hidden. Emotional moments felt exposed. Vulnerability was dangerous. Most men learned to harden themselves, to keep feelings buried deep where no one could touch them. Yet kindness appeared in small, quiet ways. A shared blanket on a cold night. An extra swallow of water slipped to a sick man. Someone taking over a watch so another could rest. These moments were not spoken of later. Acknowledging them made them fragile. Silence kept them strong. Below deck was also where fear of the unknown lived. Charts were imperfect. Navigation relied on skill and luck. Men talked about ships that vanished without trace. Reefs that tore hulls open like paper. Calm seas that trapped ships until food ran out. In the dark, imagination filled gaps that facts could not. When a ship approached land, the change below deck was immediate. Sounds shifted. Waves echoed differently. Smells changed. Earth, plants, smoke. Men stirred with restless energy. Hammocks were packed away faster. Voices grew louder. Hope crept in carefully, like something that had hurt them before. But until land was certain, below deck remained a place of waiting. Waiting for wind. Waiting for orders. Waiting for pain to ease or worsen. Time stretched thin. Days felt long, yet vanished when looking back. Even laughter sounded different here. Softer. Order. Like men were careful not to wake something sleeping in the walls. Jokes were dark, practical, brief. Humor was another tool for survival, used sparingly. As nights passed, the ship aged along with its crew. Would warp. Nails loosened. Repairs were constant but never perfect. The ship carried scars just like the men. Scratches, itches, weak points everyone knew but avoided discussing. Below deck was not just a place. It was a condition. A state of being shaped by darkness, motion, and shared endurance. Men who spent long enough there carried it inside them forever. Even years later on land, some woke at night reaching for beams that weren't there, feeling the phantom sway beneath their feet. And still, in that low-ceilinged space, beneath planks worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, life continued. Quiet, relentless, ordinary in its suffering. The sea rolled on above, uncaring, while below deck the human story kept breathing, one slow breath at a time. Food shortages changed the mood below deck faster than anything else. When barrels ran low, conversation grew shorter. Jokes disappeared. Men watched each other more closely. Rations were cut carefully, measured by hand, then by eye, then by instinct. Hunger was not dramatic at first. It crept in slowly, like a tide rising where no one was looking. Hardtack became harder, darker, more bitter as time passed. Mold was scraped off and ignored. If it smelled wrong, it was eaten anyway. Salted meat turned gray and tough, fibers pulling apart like rope. Chewing became work. Swallowing required effort. Some men soaked food in water or rum just to make it go down. Scurvy was the quiet enemy. It didn't arrive suddenly. Gums softened first. Teeth loosened. Old wounds reopened. Bruises appeared without cause. Legs grew weak. Men complained of fatigue they couldn't explain. Below deck, in low light, sickness hid easily. By the time it was obvious, it was often too late. Fresh food was a memory talked about endlessly. Fruit. Bread that bent instead of breaking. Meat that didn't burn the tongue with salt. These memories became exaggerated, almost unreal. Someone would describe an orange, its smell and color, and the group would fall silent, listening as if to a story from another world. Cooking happened below deck only when conditions allowed. A small galley fire was watched constantly. One spark could destroy everything. Stews were simple, whatever could be boiled together. Meat scraps, bits of biscuit crushed into the pot. The smell filled the space, thick and comforting, even if the taste disappointed. Warm food mattered more than good food. Water discipline was strict. Each man knew his allowance. Barrels were checked daily. Spillage caused anger. Arguments flared over dropped cups or careless handling. Thirst sharpened tempers faster than hunger. A dry mouth made everything feel urgent. Words came out harsher. Eyes narrowed more quickly. Alcohol softened the edges but created others. Drunkenness brought arguments, clumsiness, and regret. Some men drank to forget the darkness. Others avoided it, knowing the crash that followed. Below deck, even laughter under the influence sounded strained, as if it might break at any moment. Sleep changed with hunger. Stomachs growled loudly in the quiet. Dreams turned sharper, filled with food and warmth. Men woke angry at themselves for dreaming. The body demanded fuel, and there was none to give it. Below deck also became the place where stolen moments of comfort happened. Someone might carve a small object from scrap wood. A ring, a figure, a simple shape. Hands needed work to stay calm. Others mended clothes slowly, carefully, turning repair into meditation. These tasks grounded the mind. Letters, when pirates had them, were read and reread until words lost meaning. Ink faded, paper thinned. Some letters were memorized, then destroyed, the memory safer than the object. Others were guarded fiercely, tucked into oilcloth, kept close to the skin. Noise from above deck filtered down differently depending on weather. Calm seas carried footsteps clearly. Busy decks sent a constant hum downward. Battle sounds were unmistakable. Shouts, cannon thunder, the violent vibration of impact. Below deck during combat was a place of tension. Men waited, weapons ready, hearts pounding. Darkness felt heavier pressing in. After battles, below deck absorbed the aftermath. Bloodied clothes, groans of the wounded, the sharp smell of iron. Cleaning followed quickly. Blood attracted rot. Rot attracted sickness. Buckets of seawater were thrown over planks. Rags wiped surfaces until stains faded into old ones. Personal space disappeared entirely during these moments. Bodies pressed close. Heat rose. Breathing became shallow. Fear had a smell too. Sour, sharp, unmistakable. Some men shook uncontrollably afterward, hands refusing to steady. Others went strangely calm, eyes distant. Quiet returned slowly. Lamps were relit. Hammocks rehung. Life resumed, altered but continuous. No one spoke of what had just happened unless necessary. Talking made it real. Silence let it sink into routine. Below deck taught patience the hard way. Waiting for wounds to heal. Waiting for land. Waiting for hunger to ease. There was no rushing anything. The sea decided the pace. Men followed. With each passing day, the line between discomfort and normality blurred further. What once felt unbearable became expected. What once caused complaint became background noise. Adaptation was constant, quiet, and unavoidable. The ship moved on, cutting through water that looked the same everywhere. And below deck, life continued in small motions. Hands tying knots, teeth grinding biscuit, lungs drawing stale air. Each action ordinary, each one necessary, each one bringing the crew a little closer to whatever waited ahead. Pain became a familiar companion below deck. Not sharp pain most of the time. Not the kind that makes you cry out. This was slower, duller. A constant pressure in joints, in the lower back, in the neck from always bending. Knees ached from working on hard planks. Fingers stayed swollen, stiff with salt and rope burn. You learned which pains could be ignored and which ones meant something worse was coming. Old injuries never truly healed at sea. A broken rib knit itself together badly, leaving breathing shallow forever. A twisted ankle remained weak, rolling again and again with the ship's movement. Scars thickened, turning shiny and numb. Below deck, men compared these marks quietly, like proof of time served. The air itself felt heavy. Breathing deeply took effort. Oil smoke hung low, clinging to lungs. Some men developed a permanent cough, a deep, rattling sound that echoed too loudly in the confined space. Others wheezed softly in their sleep. No one commented. Drawing attention felt dangerous, as if naming weakness might make it worse. The ship's sounds were never random. Experienced pirates could tell where they were just by listening below deck. The slap of waves meant open water. A gentler roll suggested shelter nearby. The scrape of the hull hinted at shallow seas. Sound replaced sight. Listening became instinct. During long stretches of calm weather, boredom crept in like fog. Without storms or battles, time slowed painfully. Men paced short distances, counting steps unconsciously. Some stared at the same knot in the wood for hours, tracing its shape with their eyes. The mind searched for stimulation and often found none. Arguments during these times were often meaningless. A word spoken the wrong way. A look held too long. Card game gone poorly. Voices rose, then stopped abruptly, as if everyone remembered how little space there was for real conflict. Fights ended quickly. Bruises healed slowly. Below deck was also where stories changed shape. A tale told early in the voyage might be retold weeks later with new details added, old ones removed. The same event became legend through repetition. Memory bent to fit emotion. Truth mattered less than the feeling the story gave. Some men kept small routines to stay sane. Stretching muscles every morning. Counting breaths before sleep. Cleaning a weapon the same way each night. These habits created the illusion of control. In a world ruled by wind and water, even illusion helped. Light played tricks on the eyes. After hours in dimness, even a lamp felt blinding. Shadows moved when nothing else did. Men sometimes swore they saw figures where there were none. Fatigue sharpened imagination. The mind filled empty corners with shapes and whispers. Below deck also carried the weight of smells tied to memory. One whiff of tar might bring back a childhood dock. The smell of rum could recall a celebration long past. These memories hit suddenly, without warning, leaving men quiet and distant afterward. When someone fell seriously ill, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations lowered. Movement slowed around the sick man's hammock. Someone always volunteered to sit nearby, even if they said nothing. Death was not feared loudly. It was acknowledged silently, like a visitor who might not leave. If a man recovered, relief was understated. Nod. Shared drink. Life moved on. If he didn't, the ship adjusted without pause. His space filled. His role reassigned. Below deck taught harsh lessons about replacement. No one was irreplaceable. Not out of cruelty but necessity. Dreams during these weeks grew heavier. Sleep brought images of endless corridors, low ceilings, rooms that shrank slowly. Waking up felt like surfacing from underwater. A moment of confusion, sharp breath. Then reality settled back in. The ship itself felt closer than ever. Its creaks and groans sounded almost like speech. Some men talked to it quietly while working, as if it could hear. As if kindness might keep it afloat a little longer. Ships were given names for a reason. They felt alive. On rare nights, when the sea was calm and the moon bright, a faint glow filtered down through cracks in the deck. Silver light touched faces and hands, making everything look softer. In those moments, below deck felt almost peaceful, almost gentle. Men lay still, listening, letting the motion carry them. But the calm never lasted. Never did. Somewhere ahead, weather waited. Hunger waited. Pain waited. Below deck did not offer escape. Only endurance. And so the routine held. Wake without light. Work without comfort. Rest without true peace. Day after day, breath after breath. The pirates below deck continued to live in the narrow space between survival and surrender, carried forward by a ship that demanded everything and gave very little back. As voyages stretched longer, the sense of self thinned out below deck. Men spoke less about who they had been before the ship and more about who they were becoming without ever naming it. Names mattered less than roles. Strength. Endurance. A man was valued for what he could still do, not what he once dreamed of doing. The ship's motion shaped bodies in subtle ways. Sea legs were not just balance but posture. Shoulders rolled forward. Necks leaned slightly ahead, always ready for sudden movement. Even at rest, muscles stayed alert. Stillness felt unnatural. The moment the ship stopped moving entirely, many felt uneasy, as if something essential had gone missing. Below deck, touch was unavoidable. Passing in narrow spaces meant brushing arms, backs, shoulders. First it caused irritation. Later it barely registered. Physical boundaries dissolved under necessity. Warmth from another body during cold nights became something you accepted without thought. Cold was different from hunger or pain. Crept inward. In northern waters, damp cold settled into bones. Breath fogged in the air. Fingers stiffened until knots were harder to tie. Blankets offered little protection once wet. Men curled tighter in hammocks, knees pulled up, trying to preserve heat. Shivering became common, teeth chattering softly in the dark. In these colder stretches, illness worsened. Coughs deepened. Fevers lingered longer. Recovery slowed. The barber surgeon, if there was one, worked with numb hands, tools cold to the touch. Blood looked darker in low light, almost black. The smell of iron hung heavy after treatments. Food in the cold tasted even blander. Fat was prized then. Anything that could keep warmth in mattered. Men licked fingers clean, scraped bowls, chewed slowly to make the feeling last. A full stomach, even briefly, made sleep easier. Below deck was where decisions echoed long after they were made. Choices taken above, routes, risks, attacks, played out here in consequences. More wounded, less food, longer voyages. Men understood this, even if they had no voice in those moments. Resentment simmered quietly, then faded into acceptance. Songs were sung softly sometimes, not shanties meant for work, but low, almost whispered tunes. Words blurred together. Melodies repeated. Singing filled the space without demanding attention. Steadied breathing. It made the dark feel less empty. When the song ended, no one spoke about it. Objects took on emotional weight. A mug used every day. A knife worn smooth by one hand. A scrap of cloth tied around a wrist. Losing these things hurt more than losing money. They were anchors in a drifting life. Below deck also held the truth about fear. Not fear of death, that was too large and too abstract. It was fear of injury that didn't kill. Of being useless. Of being a burden. Men watched each other closely, noting limps, slowed movements, hesitation. Weakness was not mocked, but it was remembered. When tempers flared, resolution came quickly or not at all. Long grudges were too heavy to carry. Space was too tight. Silence became the preferred solution. Men turned away, focused on tasks, letting anger dissolve into fatigue. During rare moments of joy, sight of land confirmed, a successful raid promised. Below deck buzzed with energy. Hands moved faster. Voices lifted. Even the air felt lighter. Hope was contagious. For a short while, discomfort felt distant, almost manageable. But hope made the return to routine harder. After excitement faded, the darkness seemed deeper. The smells sharper. The aches louder. Men adjusted again, lowering expectations back to survival. Below deck taught lessons no one asked for. How little a human needs to live. How much they can endure without breaking. How companionship can exist without closeness, and kindness without words. Sleep came again as it always did, wrapped in motion and sound. Hammocks swayed gently. The ship moved on through water that offered no answers. And below deck, lives continued to be shaped quietly by pressure, darkness, and time. One slow night following another, indistinguishable yet essential. The longer a ship stayed at sea, the more the idea of land began to feel unreal below deck. Solid ground turned into a concept rather than a memory. Men spoke of it carefully, as if saying too much might jinx its return. When they did talk about land, it sounded flat and distant, like describing a dream after waking. Below deck, the body learned to ignore smells that would once have caused gagging. The nose dulled. The mind filtered. Only new or changing odors drew attention. Smoke where there shouldn't be, rot growing stronger, the faint sweetness of sickness. These changes were noted quietly, filed away for later concern. The ship's rhythm became internalized. Even with eyes closed, men could tell if the vessel was speeding up or slowing down. A shift in role woke sleepers instantly. The body responded before thought. Hammocks creaked in unison like a breathing organism. There were moments when below deck felt almost meditative. Long stretches of sameness stripped life down to basics. Breath, movement, tone. Some men found a strange calm in it. With nothing new to process, the mind settled into quiet observation. The present moment stretched wide. Others reacted differently. Restlessness gnawed at them. They paced, fidgeted, picked at scabs. Their eyes darted constantly, searching for something to fix or fight. Below deck magnified whatever lived inside a man already. Tools were cleaned obsessively. A blade polished again and again. A pistol disassembled and reassembled without reason. The act mattered more than the result. It kept hands busy and thoughts contained. Food rituals developed. Some men ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be the last. Others ate quickly, eyes down, as if ashamed of needing it. Sharing food was rare but deeply meaningful. When it happened, it was remembered long after. Below deck also carried the quiet humiliation of bodily failure. Men relieved themselves when they couldn't wait. They vomited without dignity. They cried out in pain or fear despite efforts to stay silent. The ship stripped away illusions of control. Everyone was reduced eventually. Night and day lost their meaning down here. Without light, time blurred. Sleep came in fragments. Some men slept too much. Others barely at all. Dreams bled into waking moments. A voice heard might not be real. A touch felt might be imagined. The mind adapted by narrowing focus. Big questions. Why am I here? What will happen to me? Were pushed aside. They were too heavy. Instead, attention settled on the immediate. The next meal. The next watch. The next breath. Below deck was where courage quietly lived. Not the loud kind sung about later, but the simple decision to keep going. To get out of a hammock with aching limbs. To face another identical day without protest. To endure. When supplies ran dangerously low, desperate measures were discussed in low voices. Fishing lines lowered when possible. Rats trapped and eaten. Leather boiled to soften it enough to chew. These acts were not dramatic. They were practical. Survival stripped of pride. If a man broke down completely, curled in his hammock, refusing to move, the crew responded in mixed ways. Some grew angry. Others grew gentle. Few turned away. There was no rulebook for despair. Everyone handled it differently. Occasionally, laughter erupted suddenly, sharp and surprising. Something absurd, a joke, a slip, a strange noise would trigger it. The sound echoed strangely, almost alarming. Then it faded as quickly as it came, leaving a kind of emptiness behind. Below deck was where promises were made quietly. If I survive this voyage, I'll leave the sea. If I reach land, I'll change. These promises were whispered, rarely kept, but they gave comfort in the moment. As the ship pushed forward, carried by wind no one controlled, the men below deck continued their slow transformation. Skin toughened, hearts hardened and softened in unexpected places. Identity shifted. The darkness remained constant, but within it, life adapted again and again. The ship creaked onward, and below deck, the human presence endured. Silent, resilient, and waiting for whatever the sea decided to give or take next. Eventually, every pirate learned that below deck was where truth lived. Above deck, there were flags, shouting, action, and sun. Below deck, there was consequence. Every choice made in the open air filtered down here and settled into bodies and bones. As voyages aged, the ship itself began to smell different. Older wood released a deeper scent, almost sweet in places. Tar softened in heat and hardened again in cold. Repairs layered over repairs created uneven surfaces that caught toes and scraped skin. The ship was never finished being fixed. It was always just surviving. Men began to recognize each other by sound rather than sight. Cough. A limp in footsteps. The way someone tied rope or shifted weight. In darkness, identity was auditory. Familiarity grew without closeness. You knew someone deeply without ever truly knowing them. Below deck was also where fear of confinement took root. The low ceiling, the narrow passages, the knowledge that in an emergency, escape would be slow. Some men avoided thinking about fire altogether. Others imagined it too often. The smell of smoke, even from a controlled flame, could trigger sudden silence. During long nights, men listened to the hull carefully, not just for damage but for change. A new creak, a sharper groan. Anything unfamiliar raised concern. The ship spoke constantly, and understanding its language meant survival. Weather changes were felt in joints before they were seen in the sky. Old injuries ached before storms. Pressure built in heads. The air felt heavier. Below deck grew tense, bodies preparing unconsciously for what was coming. When storms hit, fear was physical. Not screaming fear, but clenched muscles and shallow breaths. Men braced themselves against beams, knuckles white. The ship rolled violently. Objects flew. Water surged. And in the dark, everyone imagined the same thing. The sound of wood giving way. After surviving a storm, exhaustion hit like a wave. Muscles trembled. Eyes burned. Sleep came hard and fast, often in awkward positions where men collapsed. Dreams were brief and blank, the mind too tired to create anything else. Below deck also saw moments of unexpected reflection. A man might stare at his hands, noticing how they'd changed. Thicker skin, deeper lines, scars overlapping scars. These hands had once done something else. Something gentler. Or maybe not. The thought passed quickly. Memory behaved strangely. Childhood memories sometimes felt clearer than yesterday's events. Faces from long ago appeared vividly in dreams. Names were forgotten. Places blurred. The ship replaced geography. When ships passed each other at sea, below deck reacted before above deck celebrated or prepared. The change in movement. The muffled excitement overhead. Men stirred, checking weapons, tightening belts. The air shifted with anticipation. After encounters, below deck absorbed silence again. Victory did not remove hunger or pain. Loss did not stop the ship. Everything continued. Occasionally men spoke of age. Not in years, but in how long they thought they had left. Sea life aged people unevenly. Some looked old quickly. Others stayed deceptively strong until they didn't. Below deck showed the truth. Who struggled to stand, who breathed harder, who slept longer. There were no mirrors down here, not real ones. Men caught glimpses of themselves in polished metal or still water. Faces looked harsher, eyes deeper set, expressions unfamiliar. Recognition came slowly. Below deck forced honesty. You could not pretend to be fearless while shaking. You could not hide illness for long. The space revealed everything eventually. And still, within that honesty there was endurance. Men adapted again. They always did. Complaints faded. Routine returned. The ship moved on. In the quiet hours, with only the creak of wood and the soft sway of hammocks, Below deck felt suspended between worlds. Not land, not sea, just movement and time. The pirates breathed stale air, shared darkness and waited. For wind, for land, for change, or simply for the next hour to pass. Below deck, monotony became its own kind of danger. Days passed in slow succession, each indistinguishable from the last. Men rose, ate, worked, slept, and repeated. The mind, starved for stimulation, began to play tricks. Shadows appeared where none existed. Sounds carried strange meanings. A dropped rope could startle a man enough to make him lash out. The body remained alert even when nothing was happening. Hunger shaped behavior subtly but profoundly. Even when meals were taken, men chewed cautiously, assessing whether the portion was enough. Hardtack was broken down meticulously. Salted meat sliced into uniform strips. Rations were counted repeatedly to ensure fairness, or survival. Sharing food was both a risk and a gift. One bite given away could mean one less bite for oneself. Water discipline remained constant. Barrel taps were checked obsessively. Cups were cleaned carefully. Any spillage noted immediately. Fresh water, when found, was celebrated quietly. Scarcity made it precious. Each swallow reminded men of vulnerability. Rum offered temporary relief, a brief illusion of abundance, but carried consequences too. Hangovers, clumsiness, arguments. Below deck was also where superstition thrived. Whistling was avoided, believed to call up storms. Knots tied incorrectly were seen as inviting disaster. Certain words were never spoken. Objects were positioned carefully. Pirates carried charms, tokens, and symbols. Coins, bones, pieces of cloth, believing these could influence luck. Rituals, small and silent, filled the time and kept panic at bay. The ship's rhythm infiltrated even thoughts. Rolling, pitching, and swaying became second nature. The body moved unconsciously in tandem with the vessel. Sleep required adjustment. Even in moments of rest, the mind accounted for the motion. Waking felt like surfacing from water. For newcomers it caused nausea. For veterans it was second skin. Below deck, proximity forced intimacy with discomfort. Skin against wood, wood against wood. Heat, cold, damp, and the constant smell of salt, sweat, and decay formed an inseparable mixture. Bodies pressed close in hammocks or narrow passages, sharing warmth, moisture, and disease. Boundaries dissolved in necessity. Illness crept quietly but with efficiency. Scurvy, dysentery, fevers, and infections moved among hammocks like invisible predators. Wounds became festering. Fingers stiffened. Gums bled. Bruises deepened without contact. Below deck, sickness could dominate without anyone realizing until it was too late. The barber surgeon, if present, worked tirelessly, but skill and resources were limited. Tools were crude. Remedies often ineffective. Alcohol or herbs were used where more sophisticated treatments were needed. Death was quiet. Bodies were wrapped, sometimes in oilcloth, sometimes in nothing at all, until the sea reclaimed them. Below deck, secrecy and rumor interwove. Conversations carried low tones. Whispers about treasure, ports, women, or betrayal circulated carefully. Lies and truths blended until it was impossible to know which was which. Some men thrived on this, testing trust. Others recoiled, learning quickly to keep their own counsel. The cold, when it arrived, was relentless. Hands stiffened. Breathing became shallow. Hammocks offered only marginal relief. Wet clothing exacerbated every chill. Fires above deck might warm the surface, but below, the cold persisted, gnawing at bones. Sleep habits evolved. Fragmented, interrupted, shallow. Dreams merged with reality. Some dreamed of dry land or past lives, only to wake to rolling floors and the smell of salt. Nightmares of drowning or falling were common. Men woke clutching at beams or ropes instinctively. Even laughter had to be measured. It could not be loud, or it would carry unnaturally. Small jokes whispered. Low chuckles shared under the faint glow of a lamp. Humor became a tool, a salve, a way to keep morale from cracking entirely. Below deck adaptation was constant. Every shift in weather, every roll of the ship, every minor injury demanded recalibration. Men learned to move without thinking. Hands and feet developed memory independent of consciousness. Eyes learned to see in dim light. Smells warned, guided, and communicated. Life here created a hierarchy of endurance. Those who could endure longest were implicitly respected. Strength mattered. Resilience mattered more. Courage was quiet. It was waking each day despite discomfort, hunger, and danger. In these enclosed quarters, identity became practical. A man was measured by skill, reliability, and tolerance. Past and future blurred. Only present capacity mattered. Relationships formed around necessity. Trust was functional. Betrayal was remembered. Friendships survived by performance rather than emotion. The ship rolled on, cutting through water endlessly. Above deck, sails strained. Below deck, bodies pressed together, hearts beating in shared rhythm, and the slow, quiet endurance of human life continued. Each breath drawn through stale, heavy air. Each motion of the vessel transmitted to every joint and muscle, and every man adapted in silence. Below deck, hygiene became a constant battle, and often a losing one. Hair grew long and tangled. Beards thickened into wild mats that collected salt and sweat. Hands were perpetually grimy, smelling faintly of tar, rope, and the day's meals. Men scratched where they itched, oblivious to lice, fleas, and scabs. It was impossible to remain clean, and eventually you stopped trying. Survival mattered more than comfort. The confined space amplified every sound. A cough echoed unnaturally. Footsteps became a rhythmic drum. Objects scraping would sounded like a warning. In quiet stretches, the hum of wind above deck was almost unbearable, a reminder that the world outside kept moving while below, men were trapped in their shared existence. Below deck was also where rituals took subtle hold. Morning routines were repeated mechanically. Hammocks folded and stacked the same way every day. Ropes coiled identically. Weapons cleaned to the same standard. Small acts of repetition brought structure and safety to an otherwise chaotic life. Food rituals were equally strict. Men broke biscuits into precise pieces, measured rations in the same way, and rationed water by careful eye and habit. Eating was functional, never leisurely. Sharing was significant, rare, and meaningful. Food scarcity dictated relationships as much as skill or courage. The smell of the ship shaped memory. The salt tang of the sea mixed with tar, mold, sweat, and smoke. Once immersed, it became impossible to forget. Even in port, some men reported that the scent clung to them, carried into inns and streets, marking them as part of the sea and the ship. Illness was pervasive. Scurvy, dysentery, fevers, and wounds were constant threats. Fevered bodies trembled in hammocks. Sores festered. Blood clotted into wood. Pirates adapted to sickness, but the ship never forgot it. Survivors carried scars, permanent reminders of life below. Noise from above deck filtered down unevenly. Shouts carried urgency. The clatter of a fight brought tension. Cannon fire sent vibrations through planks. Even distant storms reached ears below, creating a subtle dread that persisted long after the event passed. Hearing became a survival skill. Below deck, fear and courage intertwined. Fear of storms, fire, rot, and hunger pressed constantly. Courage was quiet. It was continuing through the discomfort, moving in darkness, enduring illness, surviving violence, and performing tasks that seemed small but mattered immensely. It was unremarkable heroism, repeated daily. Men adapted to the ship's motion physically and psychologically. Balance became automatic. Muscles learned to compensate for rolling, pitching, and sudden jolts. Sleep became fragmented yet functional. Hands remembered rope knots. Eyes adapted to dim light. Every sense recalibrated for survival. Water discipline remained strict. Barrels were monitored. Spillage was noted. Fresh water, when available, was prized. Rum served a double purpose. Liquid, yes, but also comfort, heat, and moral relief. Excess led to conflict, but moderation helped endurance. A sip could make the difference between despair and tolerance. Below deck, the concept of time became abstract. Without sunlight filtering fully, days merged. Some men marked time by the smell of food, the number of hammocks swung, or the sequence of chores. Others counted stars or relied on distant memories. Time became more about events than hours or minutes. Space constraints forced adaptation. Passing someone meant turning sideways, bending low, or pausing to let others move. Sharing air, warmth, and movement created a subtle closeness. Boundaries were functional. Privacy was a memory from land. Sleep was restless. Hammocks swung. Breathing mingled. Dreams were distorted. Men sometimes dreamt of drowning, falling, or endless walking on solid ground. Waking was disorienting, as the motion continued. The line between dream and reality blurred. Below deck was where personal endurance was tested daily. Food, water, air, warmth, movement, and injury formed a constant test. There were no breaks, only small victories. Surviving another hour, tying a knot without cutting a finger, eating without illness, sleeping without fear. Successes were quiet but profound. The ship moved inexorably, carrying bodies and breath and memory forward. Below deck, life continued. Ordinary, painful, dark, alive. Each man a part of the vessel as much as it was a part of him. Survival was the rhythm. Endurance was the measure. And slowly, quietly, men adapted to the existence only the ship could provide. Below deck, monotony shaped perception as much as survival. The same walls, the same smells, the same dim light, pressed every day. Men became attuned to subtle changes. A new creak in the planks, the slight shift in rope tension, a change in the air's humidity. Awareness became instinctive. Every sense sharpened. Each adapted to the narrow, moving world. The smell of the ship was constant. Salt, sweat, tar, old food, and smoke blended into a single recognizable odor. It marked the body, clothing, and hair. For newcomers, it was overwhelming. For veterans, it became home. Even after months or years at sea, the scent lingered in memory, haunting or comforting depending on the day. Below deck, space was intimate and relentless. Men shared hammocks or slept inches apart, feeling each other's movements. The warmth of another body was a comfort in cold weather, and a nuisance in heat, yet it was impossible to avoid. The ship compressed life into this small volume, where privacy was a luxury no one could afford. Work never ceased. Even without immediate danger, there were ropes to coil, barrels to move, weapons to maintain, and decks to scrub. Tasks were repetitive, yet essential. Neglect led to accidents, injury, or worse. Discipline below deck was subtle but strict. Survival depended on competence and attention. Food dictated behavior. Every meal, or lack of it, controlled mood and energy. Hardtack, salted meat, dried peas. Nutrition was minimal, monotony maximal. Sharing was infrequent and meaningful. Men watched each other eat, silently calculating how long their own rations might last. The scarcity made hunger a constant mental presence. Water was rationed carefully. Freshwater barrels were guarded. Any waste or spillage caused murmurs or reprimands. Rum, though slightly more abundant, was both a pleasure and a risk. Excess caused arguments, impaired coordination, and even accidents. Alcohol became both medicine and hazard, a double-edged tool for endurance. Illness spread rapidly in confined quarters. Scurvy, dysentery, fevers, and infections were invisible predators. Men often hid symptoms, fearing incapacity or ridicule. Yet bodies revealed everything eventually. Pallor, weakness, trembling. Below deck, the sick were tended with limited tools and knowledge, often by men as injured or untrained as the patients themselves. Sleep was fragmented. Hammocks swung with the motion of the ship. Noise carried from one end to another. Snoring, coughing, groans, and the creak of wood intermingled. Dreams were disjointed. sometimes indistinguishable from waking. Fear, pain, and longing mixed into restless visions. Rest was rarely complete, yet necessary. Noise had its own hierarchy. Above deck, orders, wind, and combat dominated. Below deck, it was smaller sounds. Water dripping, rope rubbing, wood shifting, whispered speech. Each sound carried meaning. Recognizing danger, locating crew members, anticipating changes in the ship's motion. Listening was as vital as seeing. Rats and vermin thrived in this environment. They gnawed through wood and provisions. Pirates hated them but also depended on their warnings. A sudden scurry could signal a leak or shift. Some men even quietly tolerated rats as companions, drawing strange comfort from shared survival. Fear became constant, though often muted. Not the dramatized fear of cannon fire or storms, but the persistent anxiety of confinement, illness, hunger, or injury. Men learned to mask it, to continue working, to endure. Silence often concealed terror better than any spoken words. Below deck, relationships were practical. Alliances, friendships, and grudges were built on survival and trust. Betrayal could be fatal, but loyalty also had limits. Space was too tight to waste energy on petty disputes. Cooperation ensured survival. Silence often replaced conversation, and subtle observation replaced gossip. The ship shaped identity. Physical and mental adaptation occurred gradually. Skin toughened, eyes adjusted to low light. Hands became calloused from rope, knife, and hammer. The mind learned patience, observation, and calculation. Each man became a part of the ship's rhythm, inseparable from its creaks, sway, and smell. Below deck was also where small comforts gained immense value. A clean rag, a warm patch of sunlight filtering through cracks, a shared joke, or a moment's quiet became treasured. These small experiences provided relief, though fleeting, from relentless pressure. And still the ship moved forward. Waves pushed it across oceans. Wind filled sails. Men below deck continued in unbroken routines, working, sleeping, eating, enduring. Life was compressed, repetitive, and intimate, yet it forged resilience, adaptation, and an unspoken bond among those who shared this confined world. Below deck, the body learned to anticipate danger before it arrived. Storms, collisions, or sudden maneuvers were detected first by shifts in weight and motion. The creak of a beam or the subtle snap of a rope was a signal to brace, adjust, and endure. Newcomers often stumbled, but veterans moved instinctively, their bodies aligned with the ship's rhythm. The darkness molded perception. Eyes adjusted to dim lamplight and moonlight filtering through cracks. Shadows became familiar, corners memorized. Men learned where to place their feet to avoid splinters, barrels, or fellow sailors. Space became a mental map layered with caution, efficiency, and habit. Temperature extremes were constant companions. Tropical heat baked the air, making sweat cling to skin and clothing. Cold northern waters seeped into bones, making each motion stiff and deliberate. Men learned to layer, adjust posture, and share warmth in tight hammocks. Endurance was physical but also mental. Food scarcity shaped hierarchy. The ability to ration, to manage supply, and to take only what was needed often distinguished the experienced from the novice. Hardtack, salted meat, and dried legumes were consumed with ritual precision. Every bite counted. Greed or carelessness could spark conflict or compromise survival. Below deck, hygiene was a daily challenge. Hair and beards thickened and tangled. Skin became layered with grime, sweat, and salt. Washing was rare, often limited to seawater when available. Lice, fleas, and other vermin became part of life. Scratching, itching, and discomfort were normalized. Those who complained were marked as weak. Illness spread quietly but efficiently. Dysentery, scurvy, fevers, and infections preyed on the confined. Bodies weakened slowly, sometimes unnoticed until a man could no longer perform even basic tasks. The barber surgeon, if present, had limited means. Alcohol, herbs, crude instruments. Death, when it came, was quiet but undeniable. Noise below deck carried intense meaning. Footsteps, groans, coughing, or the shift of a barrel could signal danger or injury. Silence, too, was significant. It might indicate watchfulness, illness, or fear. Listening became as crucial as seeing. Perception sharpened through constant attention to subtle cues. The ship itself became a living partner. Its creaks, groans, and rolls dictated movement, attention, and expectation. Men adapted to anticipate its moods. A storm's approach, a sudden change in wind, or a shifting cargo load became predictable through feel, sound, and smell. The vessel's personality merged with the crew's awareness. Space constraints forced intimacy and adaptation. Passing through narrow corridors required cooperation. Hammocks were shared or packed closely. Heat, movement, and contact were unavoidable. Over time, men became less sensitive to discomfort, accepting proximity as necessity. Sleep was irregular, fragmented, and influenced by the ship's motion. Dreams were often disturbed, blending past memories, fears, and desires. Men woke abruptly to a change in pitch or sway, sometimes confused about reality. Rest was functional, not restorative. Rats and other vermin were constant companions. They scavenged, gnawed, and frightened newcomers. Yet, they were also a reminder of life's persistence and a warning system for spoiled food or water leaks. Some pirates tolerated them, even found strange comfort in their presence. Below deck, superstition thrived. Rituals governed daily life. Knots tied in specific ways, certain words avoided, charms carried. Whistling might invite storms. Observing omens prevented panic. Belief, however small, offered structure in a world where control was an illusion. Fear and courage were inseparable. Fear was constant, of illness, hunger, injury, or confinement. Courage was quiet endurance. It manifested in rising each day, performing chores, tying knots, maintaining weapons, and simply surviving within the ship's narrow walls. Heroism was ordinary and uncelebrated. Below deck, the passage of time was abstract. Days, weeks, and months blurred. Men marked time by the sequence of meals, chores, or changes in the wind. Memory became unreliable. Survival replaced routine as the measure of life. Small comforts gained extraordinary value. A shared blanket, a warm spot in the sun, a clean patch of clothing, or a whispered joke provided relief. These fleeting moments of respite reminded men that life persisted despite hardship. Through every hardship, heat, cold, hunger, illness, confinement, the crew adapted. Bodies grew calloused, eyes adjusted, reflexes sharpened, and minds endured. Below deck, the human spirit continued quietly, enduring the relentless rhythm of ship, sea, and survival. Below deck, repetition became a kind of rhythm, almost musical in its consistency. Men rose, worked, ate, slept, and performed endless tasks again and again. Rope coiling, barrel moving, weapon cleaning, each motion precise, rehearsed, almost unconscious. Newcomers struggled, but veterans moved as if guided by memory alone. Every action was tied to survival, every pause calculated. The darkness shaped perception. Light was rare, flickering from oil lamps or slivers through cracks. Shadows became familiar companions, corners mapped in the mind. Eyes adjusted slowly, distinguishing objects not by shape but by texture and memory. Mistakes often led to injury, a stubbed toe, a bruise, or a spill. Precision was essential. Temperature extremes dominated life. Tropics baked the air, causing sweat and stickiness. Northern waters chilled bones, even with layered clothing. Men adapted by shifting positions, sharing warmth, or compressing bodies in hammocks. The body became resilient, learning the subtleties of heat and cold as constant instructors. Food scarcity reinforced hierarchy. Rations were measured and monitored. Hardtack, salted meat, and dried legumes sustained but rarely satisfied. Sharing was rare, a sign of trust or camaraderie. Hunger sharpened instincts. Those who managed supplies wisely gained subtle respect. Those who hoarded or wasted quietly earned scorn. Hygiene was minimal and improvised. Hair and beards thickened, skin grew rough, and vermin thrived. Lice and fleas were omnipresent. Scratching became rhythmic, unconscious. The unclean smell of sweat, tar, and salt hung persistently. The crew normalized discomfort. It was a part of survival. Illness spread with subtle efficiency. Dysentery, scurvy, and fevers preyed on the crew. A man could weaken unnoticed until he collapsed. Treatments were rudimentary. Alcohol, herbs, crude surgical interventions. Death came quietly for many, and the crew adjusted without ceremony, preserving the routines of life that continued despite loss. Noise carried meaning. Every creak of wood, footstep, or groan could indicate danger or injury. Silence, too, was communicative. Listening became a vital skill, as much as sight or touch. Auditory awareness could prevent accidents, detect storms, or signal approaching visitors. The ship itself became a living presence. Its groans, shifts, and vibrations dictated behavior. Men adapted reflexively, anticipating movement, correcting balance, and timing actions with the vessel's rhythm. The ship was both protector and obstacle, shaping every decision below deck. Confined spaces enforced proximity. Sharing hammocks, narrow passageways, and workspaces taught tolerance and subtle communication. Heat, moisture, and touch became unavoidable. Over time, men accepted these conditions as normal. Privacy was a concept rarely experienced. Sleep was fragmented and influenced by constant motion. Hammocks swayed with every wave. Dreams were often surreal, blending memory, fear, and anticipation. Men woke abruptly from disturbances, disoriented yet compelled to continue. Rest was functional, never luxurious. Vermin, like rats and fleas, were omnipresent. They gnawed, scuttled, and startled newcomers. While pests were unwelcome, they also provided a strange sense of continuity and vigilance. Rats indicated spoiled food or leaks. They became part of the ecosystem below deck. Superstition governed behavior. Whistling, mistied knots, or careless words were avoided. Small charms, rituals, or observations gave structure. Belief offered psychological stability in a world with few certainties. Fear and courage coexisted intimately. Fear was constant, of illness, injury, hunger, confinement. Courage was quiet and practical, waking each day, completing chores, maintaining weapons, enduring darkness. Heroism was ordinary, measured in repeated acts of survival rather than dramatic displays. Time became abstract. Days blurred into nights, weeks into months. Men marked time by meals, chores, or changing wind patterns. Memory shifted. The present moment became the anchor. Survival dictated attention, and routine measured existence. Small comforts gained extraordinary value. A dry patch of cloth, a warm spot, a shared laugh, a whispered story. Each fleeting moment grounded men, providing reminders of life's persistence and humanity amid hardship. Below deck, bodies hardened, minds sharpened, and endurance deepened. The crew learned to live in the rhythm of ship, sea, and survival. In darkness, in motion, with scarcity and discomfort, the quiet persistence of human life carried forward, undisturbed and uncelebrated, yet undeniable. Below deck, time was measured not by hours but by repetition. Each day followed a similar pattern. Waking, performing tasks, eating, resting, and enduring. For newcomers it felt endless. For veterans it became rhythm, a continuous loop that both soothed and wore on the mind. Tasks like coiling rope, stacking barrels, and cleaning weapons were repeated mechanically, but each repetition reinforced survival skills. The darkness imposed constant adjustment. Men moved cautiously, memorizing every corner and obstruction. Shadows blended into one another, and every shape was mentally catalogued. Mistakes could lead to injury. Stubbed toes, bruised shins, or crushed fingers. Eyes adapted slowly, learning to detect motion rather than detail, turning perception into instinct. Temperature extremes shaped daily life. In tropical waters, humidity and heat clung to skin and clothing, making men sticky and irritable. In northern seas, cold seeped through layers, stiffening joints and slowing movement. Shared warmth in hammocks was vital. Adaptation became physical, instinctual, and necessary for survival. Food dictated both mood and social structure. Hardtack, salted meat, and dried legumes were constant, monotonous staples. Sharing food became a rare act of camaraderie or trust, while hoarding or mismanagement could earn subtle scorn. Hunger sharpened attention, patience, and cunning, influencing both behavior and relationships. Hygiene was minimal. Hair grew thick, tangled, and collected salt and grime. Beards formed mats. Skin thickened with dirt and sweat. Lice, fleas, and scabs were common, creating constant discomfort. Pirates adapted, normalizing the unclean and learning to focus on essentials rather than minor irritations. Illness spread efficiently below deck. Scurvy, dysentery, fevers, and infections claimed the weak. Symptoms were often hidden, as men feared appearing incapable. Treatment was rudimentary. Alcohol, herbs, crude surgery. Death was quiet, often unnoticed in the routine of survival. The crew adjusted without ceremony, ensuring life and work continued. Noise was significant. Footsteps, groans, and the scraping of barrels could indicate danger. Silence, conversely, could signal illness, fear, or watchfulness. Auditory perception became as vital as sight or touch. Men learned to interpret subtle cues, anticipating events before they occurred. The ship itself became a living presence. Every groan, shift, and vibration communicated movement, weather changes or stress. Men adapted, moving instinctively to align with the ship's rhythm. The vessel dictated behavior as much as the sea, shaping the body and mind through constant interaction. Space enforced proximity. Narrow passageways and shared hammocks required tolerance and coordination. Heat, moisture, and touch were unavoidable. Over time, men accepted these conditions as ordinary. Privacy was non-existent, and personal space was a luxury remembered but seldom experienced. Sleep was restless and fragmented. Hammocks swayed, groaning under weight. Dreams merged with reality, often blurring fear, memory, and anticipation. Waking was abrupt, disorienting, yet action was required immediately. Rest was functional, never restorative, yet essential. Vermin thrived. Rats and fleas scuttled through every corner, gnawed through food and wood. While pests were unwelcome, they provided subtle warnings, spoiled provisions, leaks, or movement changes. Some men tolerated them, drawing strange comfort from their presence. Superstition governed subtle behaviors. Whistling, careless words, or mistied knots were avoided. Charms, rituals, and omens offered structure and reassurance in a life where control was limited. Belief, even slight, provided psychological stability. Fear and courage intertwined. Fear was constant. Illness, injury, hunger, confinement. Courage was quiet endurance. Waking each day, performing duties, maintaining weapons, enduring darkness. Heroism was understated, measured in daily acts of survival, not dramatic feats. Time lost its meaning. Days merged into nights, weeks into months. Men marked time by meals, chores, or wind patterns. Memory became unreliable. The present moment anchored existence. Small comforts became treasures. A dry cloth, a warm hammock spot, a shared joke, or a fleeting moment of calm. These moments grounded the men, sustaining humanity in an environment of scarcity, darkness, and discomfort. Below deck, bodies hardened, minds sharpened, and resilience deepened. The crew learned to exist in the ship's rhythm, alive in darkness, motion, and scarcity. Survival, endurance, and quiet adaptation became the defining measures of life below. Below deck, monotony ruled, yet it was a teacher in endurance. Every day followed the same unchanging pattern. Wake, perform assigned tasks, eat, rest, and survive. Even minor differences, a shift in wind, a creak of wood, a subtle change in temperature, were noted instantly, mentally catalogued, and remembered. The repetition honed instincts, sharpened reflexes, and prepared the crew for unpredictable danger. Darkness shaped perception. Oil lamps flickered faintly, casting wavering shadows. Cracks in the deck allowed slivers of moonlight to creep in, highlighting textures and shapes. Every surface, every obstruction became memorized. Mistakes were costly. A stubbed toe, scraped arm, or crushed finger reminded men of the importance of awareness. Eyes learned to detect movement more than detail, turning sight into survival. Temperature extremes were ever present. Tropic heat clung to skin and clothing, sticky and oppressive, while northern cold seeped into bones, stiffening muscles and slowing movement. Hammocks were shared for warmth in freezing nights. Heat became oppressive in tropical days. Adaptation was instinctive. The body learned resilience through daily exposure. Food scarcity dictated behavior. Hardtack, salted meat, and dried legumes dominated the diet. Sharing was rare, precious, and highly symbolic. Men assessed portions carefully, rationing not just for themselves but considering the consequences for the group. Hunger sharpened attention, altered mood, and reinforced hierarchy. Those who managed rations effectively earned silent respect. Hygiene was a constant struggle. Hair became tangled and thick with salt and sweat. Beards grew into mats that trapped grime. Skin thickened under layers of dirt and sweat. Lice and fleas were a normal discomfort. Pirates adapted, learning to endure persistent irritation while focusing on necessities: work, survival, and vigilance. Illness spread silently but efficiently. Dysentery, scurvy, fevers, and infections were constant threats. Symptoms were often hidden, as weakness could lead to social judgment or increased danger. Remedies were crude: alcohol, herbs, and minimal surgical intervention. Death, when it came, was quiet, and the crew adjusted immediately, ensuring daily routines continued uninterrupted. Noise carried immense significance. Footsteps, groans, and the scrape of barrels indicated danger or activity. Silence, conversely, suggested illness, fear, or watchfulness. Auditory perception became critical. Men listened intently, learning to interpret the subtle cues of their environment before visible evidence appeared. The ship itself was alive. Its groans, vibrations, and movements dictated behavior. Men adapted instinctively to align their motions with its rhythm. The vessel determined tasks, warned of hazards, and forced awareness of surroundings. Life below deck was inseparable from the ship's constant presence. Space enforced cooperation. Narrow passageways, tight hammocks, and shared workspaces required coordination, tolerance, and patience. Heat, moisture, and proximity were unavoidable. Privacy vanished. Boundaries became functional rather than personal. Sleep was irregular and shallow. Hammocks swayed with each wave. Dreams blurred with reality, mixing fear, memory, and anticipation. Waking was abrupt. Men often arose with hearts racing, reflexively prepared for action. Rest was minimal but essential for survival. Vermin, like rats and fleas, were omnipresent. They gnawed, scuttled, and startled newcomers. Yet they also provided subtle warnings: spoiled food, leaks, or unexpected movement. Some men tolerated them, finding strange companionship in their persistent presence. Superstition governed subtle aspects of behavior. Whistling, careless words, or improperly tied knots were avoided. Charms and rituals offered reassurance. Even slight belief provided psychological stability in a world largely beyond control. Fear and courage existed together. Fear of sickness, injury, hunger, confinement was constant. Courage manifested quietly, performing duties, maintaining weapons, enduring discomfort, and waking each day to repeat the cycle. Heroism was understated, measurable only in endurance and reliability. Time lost tangible meaning. Days merged into nights, weeks into months. Men marked passage by meals, chores, or wind patterns. Memory became fluid. The present anchored existence. Small comforts were treasured, a dry patch of cloth, a warm spot, a shared joke, or the flicker of light. Each provided relief, grounding men in humanity amid darkness, scarcity, and discomfort. Below deck, bodies hardened, minds sharpened, and endurance deepened. Life adapted to rhythm, motion, and proximity. Survival was measured quietly, persistently, and without recognition, as the ship carried its human cargo across endless waves. Below deck, monotony and repetition became a teacher of subtle skills. Every motion, coiling rope, stacking barrels, cleaning weapons, was repeated endlessly, until it became instinct. New men struggled to keep pace. Veterans moved without thought, their bodies aligned with the ship's rhythm. Every action mattered. Error could result in injury, wasted resources, or worse. Darkness shaped perception. Faint light from oil lamps or cracks in the deck cast long, shifting shadows. Corners, obstacles, and surfaces were memorized through repeated navigation. Mistakes left marks. Bruises, cuts, or sprains. Eyes adapted to detect movement and shape rather than detail, training the mind to read the environment instinctively. Temperature extremes shaped daily life. Tropic heat clung oppressively to skin, making every movement sticky and uncomfortable. Northern cold seeped into bones, stiffening joints and slowing reflexes. Shared hammocks provided minimal relief. Adaptation became instinctual. The body learned to endure, to seek warmth or escape heat, and to keep functioning under stress. Food scarcity dictated social and mental behavior. Hardtack, salted meat, and dried legumes were staples. Sharing was rare but significant, a silent signal of trust or camaraderie. Hunger sharpened focus, influenced decisions, and reinforced the subtle social hierarchy. Those who managed rations or resources wisely earned unspoken respect. Hygiene was minimal. Hair became matted, beards thickened, skin roughened. Vermin were ever present. Scratching, itching, and discomfort were normalized, and complaint was a mark of weakness. Adaptation meant focusing on necessities, work, survival, vigilance, while tolerating irritation and filth. Illness spread relentlessly. Scurvy, dysentery, fevers, and infections preyed on the confined. Weakness was often hidden to maintain status or avoid judgment. Treatments were rudimentary. Alcohol, herbs, crude surgery. Death was quiet. The crew adjusted immediately to continue routines without disruption. Noise was both signal and warning. Footsteps, groans, the shift of barrels or rope, even silence, communicated essential information. Auditory awareness became crucial. Men learned to interpret subtle cues, predicting danger, movement, or illness before visual confirmation. The ship itself became a living entity. Its creaks, vibrations, and shifts dictated movement, behavior, and perception. Men adapted reflexively, aligning with its rhythm, anticipating danger, and responding instinctively. Survival depended on this continuous communication with the vessel. Space enforced intimacy and coordination. Narrow corridors and shared hammocks required cooperation and tolerance. Proximity brought heat, moisture, and inevitable contact. Privacy vanished. Boundaries became functional rather than personal. Sleep was fragmented and irregular. Hammocks swayed with the ship's motion. Dreams blended fear, memory, and anticipation. Awakening was abrupt, often accompanied by muscle tension and rapid adjustment to movement. Rest was functional, restorative only in small increments. Vermin thrived, feeding on scraps, gnawing wood, and startling newcomers. They were a nuisance but also provided subtle warnings of spoiled food, leaks, or movement. Men adapted, some finding comfort in their constant presence, others using them as a mental gauge of environmental conditions. Superstition permeated daily life. Whistling, careless words, and incorrectly tied knots were avoided. Charms, rituals, and omens offered psychological relief and structure. Belief, however minimal, provided a sense of control in a world dominated by uncertainty. Fear and courage were inseparable. Fear of illness, injury, hunger, and confinement was constant. Courage manifested quietly, performing tasks, maintaining equipment, enduring discomfort, and waking to repeat the cycle. Heroism was ordinary, measured in endurance, reliability, and persistence. Time became abstract. Days blurred into nights, weeks into months. Men marked time through meals, work cycles, or environmental cues. Memory adapted. The present moment anchored existence. Small comforts gained extraordinary significance. A dry piece of cloth, warmth from shared proximity, a whispered joke, or a fleeting moment of light brought relief and a sense of continuity. These brief moments reinforced humanity in a harsh, relentless environment. Below deck, bodies hardened, minds sharpened, and endurance deepened. Life adapted to the rhythm of ship, sea, and necessity. Survival, quiet and persistent, became the defining measure of existence as the vessel carried its human cargo across endless waves. Below deck, silence was both friend and enemy. In the absence of wind, waves, and above-deck noise, every small sound resonated. Footsteps, shifting hammocks, a groan, a cough. Men became acutely aware of each other, learning to interpret the subtlest cues. A quiet whisper could carry urgent warning, while a sudden thump might signal injury, carelessness, or misfortune. Awareness became instinct, survival a matter of attentiveness. The darkness enforced vigilance. Light was scarce, flickering from oil lamps or slits in the deck. Men memorized every obstacle, every surface, every narrow passage. Missteps could result in bruises, cuts, or worse. Eyes adapted, learning to read movement, shadows, and subtle textures. Every journey through the space required focus, even for the most experienced. Temperature extremes affected every decision. Tropical heat made skin stick, muscles ache, and movement slow. Northern cold seeped deep into bones, forcing constant adjustment, layered clothing, and shared warmth in hammocks. The body learned to endure, to compensate, to remain functional despite discomfort. Adaptation became second nature. Food dictated both survival and subtle social dynamics. Rations of hardtack, salted meat, and dried legumes were meticulously divided. Sharing was rare but profoundly meaningful. Hunger sharpened awareness and patience, emphasizing hierarchy and cooperation. Those who managed food well earned quiet respect, while those who wasted or hoarded were quietly judged. Hygiene was nearly impossible to maintain. Hair tangled, beards thickened, skin collected sweat, dirt, and salt. Lice, fleas, and other vermin were unavoidable companions. Scratching, discomfort, and minor infections became routine. Adaptation meant tolerating persistent irritation while prioritizing work, survival, and attention to essential tasks. Illness thrived in these conditions. Scurvy, fevers, dysentery, and infections spread quietly. Weakness was hidden when possible, as incapacity was socially and practically dangerous. Treatments were rudimentary. Alcohol, herbs, and crude surgical procedures. Death occurred quietly, often unnoticed amid ongoing routines. Survival required focus and resilience. Noise carried deep significance. Footsteps, groans, and the scrape of rope communicated essential information. Silence indicated illness, watchfulness, or tension. Men became attuned to subtleties in sound, interpreting danger, opportunity, and the condition of the ship instinctively. The ship itself dictated life below deck. Creaks, vibrations, and movements informed every action. Men adjusted instinctively, timing tasks with the roll, sway, and shift of the vessel. The ship was alive, a partner and obstacle, shaping daily survival and behavior. Space required tolerance and cooperation. Hammocks were close, passageways narrow. Heat, moisture, and physical contact were unavoidable. Privacy vanished. Boundaries became functional rather than personal. Men adapted socially as well as physically. Sleep was irregular, shallow, and often interrupted by the ship's movement. Dreams blurred with memory and anticipation. Waking was sudden, with bodies reflexively adjusting to rolling and pitching. Rest was essential yet never complete. Vermin remained constant companions. Rats gnawed, scuttled, and startled men. They indicated spoiled food or moisture problems. Some found comfort in their presence, while others treated them as silent warnings of environmental changes. Superstition influenced behavior. Whistling, careless words, and mistied knots were avoided. Charms, rituals, and beliefs provided psychological structure. Even minimal belief offered a sense of control amid a largely uncontrollable environment. Fear and courage intertwined. Fear of sickness, injury, hunger, and confinement was constant. Courage manifested quietly, performing duties, enduring discomfort, and continuing each day. Heroism was understated, measured by persistence and resilience rather than grand acts. Time became abstract. Days and nights blended. Weeks stretched into months. Men marked time through chores, meals, or environmental cues. Present moment awareness became critical for survival. Small comforts held immense value. A dry patch of cloth, warmth from a hammock, a whispered joke, or a brief moment of light anchored men in reality, preserving humanity amid darkness, discomfort, and confinement. Below deck, bodies hardened, minds sharpened, and resilience deepened. Life aligned with the rhythm of ship, sea, and survival. Human persistence endured quietly as the vessel pressed forward across endless waves. Below deck, the rhythm of survival dominated every aspect of life. Days followed predictable cycles, yet unpredictability lingered in every shadow, every sound, every gust of air filtering through cracks. Men woke, performed tasks, ate, rested, and endured, repeating the pattern endlessly. This repetition, while monotonous, became a form of meditation, a sharpening of instinct, a conditioning of both body and mind. Darkness was constant, broken only by flickering lamps or the rare sliver of moonlight. Every surface, obstacle, and corner became memorized. Feet moved with precision, hands grasped familiar textures, and eyes learned to detect movement rather than detail. Mistakes were painful reminders. A stubbed toe, a scrape, or a crushed finger. Navigation through this confined world demanded continuous awareness. Temperature extremes shaped both behavior and adaptation. Tropic heat clung to bodies, saturating clothing with sweat, making tasks exhausting and constant vigilance necessary. In northern waters, cold penetrated layers, stiffening joints and slowing reflexes. Shared warmth in hammocks was essential. Cooperation became survival. Bodies hardened, and minds learned subtle strategies to endure discomfort. Food controlled both body and social dynamics. Hardtack, salted meat, and dried legumes were the mainstay, offering nutrition but little pleasure. Rations were counted, monitored, and rarely shared. When sharing occurred, it was a quiet gesture of trust or camaraderie. Hunger sharpened instincts, reinforced hierarchy, and created subtle tension. Survival was always the priority. Hygiene was nearly impossible. Hair tangled, beards thickened, and skin accumulated layers of sweat, salt, and grime. Lice, fleas, and other vermin thrived. Scratching and discomfort were normalized. Men tolerated conditions that would have been unbearable on land, focusing attention on work, vigilance, and survival. Illness spread quietly, with devastating effect. Scurvy, dysentery, fevers, and infections preyed on the crew. Symptoms were hidden when possible to avoid social judgment or vulnerability. Treatments were basic: alcohol, herbs, and crude surgery. Death came silently, and the crew adapted immediately to maintain continuity in labor and morale. Noise carried vital information. Footsteps, groans, and the scrape of rope signaled danger, injury, or urgency. Silence could indicate illness, fear, or watchfulness. Men became attuned to subtleties in sound, interpreting the ship's condition, the environment, and the actions of fellow crewmen without visual confirmation. The ship itself dictated daily life. Creaks, vibrations, and rolling communicated continuously. Men adjusted instinctively, timing movements with the vessel's rhythm. The ship was simultaneously a partner and adversary, shaping every motion, every task, and every moment of consciousness below deck. Confined space required cooperation and tolerance. Narrow passageways and tightly packed hammocks enforced proximity. Heat, moisture, and unavoidable contact became routine. Privacy vanished. Boundaries were functional, not personal, and interpersonal adaptation became as critical as physical skill. Sleep was brief, shallow, and fragmented. Hammocks swayed with each wave. Dreams blurred into memory, anticipation, and fear. Men woke suddenly, reflexively adjusting to the ship's motion. Rest was necessary but incomplete, a functional pause in the continuous demands of life below deck. Vermin, ever present, gnawed, scuttled, and startled. Rats and fleas were nuisances but also warning signals. Spoiled food, moisture, or structural issues. Some men tolerated them, finding reassurance in their presence, while others treated them as silent indicators of environmental changes. Superstition influenced every small act. Whistling, careless words, or mistied knots were avoided. Charms, rituals, and beliefs offered psychological stability. Even minimal belief provided a sense of control in a life dominated by uncertainty and danger. Fear and courage existed together. Fear of illness, injury, hunger, confinement was constant. Courage manifested quietly, performing daily duties, enduring discomfort, and rising each day to continue. Heroism was understated, measured in persistence, endurance, and reliability. Time lost conventional meaning. Days merged into nights, weeks into months. Men marked time by chores, meals, or environmental cues. Memory became fluid. Survival required present-moment awareness, and the rhythm of ship and sea replaced clocks. Small comforts gained profound significance. A dry patch of cloth, warmth from a hammock, a whispered joke, or a fleeting moment of light anchored men to reality. These minor pleasures preserved humanity amidst the relentless hardships. Below deck, bodies hardened, minds sharpened, and endurance deepened. Life became inseparable from the rhythm of ship, sea, and necessity. Human resilience persisted quietly as the vessel pressed forward across the endless ocean, carrying men who had become part of its pulse. Below deck, life was defined by continuous motion, yet paradoxically also by stillness. The confined space amplified every sensation: heat, cold, sweat, vibration, and sound, making men acutely aware of their bodies and surroundings. Each day followed a rhythm: rising, performing assigned chores, eating, enduring discomfort, and attempting rest. The monotony honed instincts and sharpened perception, as survival demanded attentiveness to every detail. Darkness ruled. Oil lamps flickered unevenly. Shadows danced across walls and barrels, and the faintest light from above deck pierced cracks and seams. Men learned to navigate by memory, touch, and auditory cues. Mistakes left marks. Stubbed toes, bruised elbows, and scraped hands were constant reminders that attention was survival. Eyes adapted to detect motion over detail, creating an instinctual map of their environment. Temperature extremes demanded constant adaptation. Tropical heat made the air suffocating, sticking clothing to skin and exhausting muscles. Northern cold penetrated layers of clothing, stiffened joints, and forced men to share warmth in cramped hammocks. Bodies became resilient through repetition. Adaptation was physical, psychological, and continuous. Food dictated both survival and social order. Hardtack, salted meat, and dried legumes dominated the diet. Portions were rationed meticulously, measured carefully, and rarely shared. When sharing occurred, it signified trust or camaraderie. Hunger sharpened attention and reinforced social hierarchy. Men who managed food effectively earned silent respect, while waste or greed drew subtle disapproval. Hygiene was a constant struggle. Hair grew matted, beards thickened, and skin accumulated layers of sweat, dirt, and salt. Lice, fleas, and other vermin thrived, causing chronic irritation. Pirates tolerated discomfort as routine, focusing on survival, work, and observation rather than cleanliness. Illness spread quickly and quietly. Scurvy, dysentery, fevers, and infections preyed on bodies weakened by malnutrition and exposure. Symptoms were often hidden, as appearing weak risked social and practical consequences. Treatments were rudimentary: alcohol, herbs, or crude surgical interventions. Death was quiet, sometimes unnoticed amid daily routines. Noise was vital communication. Footsteps, groans, or the scrape of rope indicated danger or movement. Silence signaled illness, fear, or alertness. Men honed auditory perception to anticipate threats and respond before sight could confirm events. The ship itself was alive. Its creaks, vibrations, and sway dictated timing, movement, and attention. Men adjusted instinctively to its rhythm, integrating with its constant motion. Survival was as much about understanding the ship as enduring the sea. Confined spaces demanded tolerance. Narrow corridors and hammocks forced close proximity. Heat, moisture, and contact were inevitable. Privacy was absent. Social adaptation became essential, as cooperation maintained both order and safety. Sleep was irregular and fragmented. Hammocks swung, bodies pressed together, and dreams merged with memory and fear. Men awoke suddenly, reflexively correcting balance, ever alert to shifting conditions. Rest was functional, never restorative, yet vital to continue the daily cycle. Vermin thrived. Rats, fleas, and other pests gnawed, scuttled, and startled. While nuisances, they also served as environmental indicators. Spoiled food, moisture intrusion, or structural shifts. Adaptation included acceptance of their presence, and some men even found a strange reassurance in it. Superstition governed small acts. Whistling, careless words, or mistied knots were avoided. Charms, rituals, and beliefs offered structure and reassurance. Even minimal faith provided psychological stability in a life of near-constant uncertainty. Fear and courage coexisted. Fear of injury, hunger, disease, and confinement was continuous. Courage manifested in quiet acts, performing duties, enduring discomfort, and rising to repeat the cycle daily. Heroism was measured in endurance and reliability, not spectacle. Time became abstract. Days merged into nights, weeks into months. Men measured passage by chores, meals, or environmental changes. Memory adapted. The present moment became the anchor for survival. Small comforts became monumental. A dry patch of cloth, warmth in a hammock, a whispered joke, or a fleeting glimmer of light provided grounding and relief. These small moments preserved a sense of humanity in relentless conditions. Below deck, bodies toughened, minds sharpened, and endurance deepened. Life conformed to the rhythm of the ship, the sea, and necessity. Survival was quiet, persistent, and uncelebrated, yet undeniable. A testament to human resilience carried forward across endless waves. Below deck, repetition became both a teacher and a burden. Every day began with waking in cramped hammocks, followed by chores, meals, and enduring the suffocating dim environment. Over time, these routines sharpened reflexes and instincts. Veterans moved with unthinking precision, navigating obstacles instinctively, while newcomers struggled, often bruised or scraped as their bodies adjusted to the space and the ship's constant motion. The darkness dominated perception. Oil lamps flickered faintly, shadows danced across barrels and beams, and occasional moonlight seeped through deck cracks. Men memorized every surface, obstacle, and corner. Eyes learned to detect motion over detail, interpreting faint shifts as warnings or instructions. Every misstep had consequences. Stubbed toes, cuts, or crushed fingers reminded men that vigilance was necessary at all times. Temperature extremes shaped behavior. Tropical heat left skin sticky, clothing damp, and muscles fatigued. Northern cold penetrated layers, stiffening joints and slowing reflexes. Shared warmth in hammocks was essential. The body adapted, muscles strengthened, reflexes sharpened, and tolerance for discomfort increased gradually over weeks and months. Food dictated both survival and social dynamics. Hardtack, salted meat, and dried legumes formed the monotonous diet. Rations were measured and carefully monitored. Sharing was rare but meaningful. Hunger sharpened senses, reinforced hierarchy, and created subtle social pressures. Those who managed resources wisely gained unspoken respect, while greed or waste drew quiet judgment. Hygiene was difficult to maintain. Hair tangled, beards thickened, and skin accumulated layers of sweat, salt, and dirt. Lice, fleas, and scabs were common, causing chronic discomfort. Men learned to endure and adapt, focusing on survival and essential tasks rather than cleanliness. Illness spread silently and swiftly. Scurvy, dysentery, fevers, and infections preyed on weakened bodies. Symptoms were hidden when possible. Weakness could lead to social or practical vulnerability. Treatments were primitive: alcohol, herbs, or crude surgical procedures. Death was quiet, often unnoticed, and routines continued without pause. Noise became a vital sense. Footsteps, groans, or the scrape of rope communicated information. Silence indicated illness, alertness, or fear. Men trained themselves to interpret auditory cues, predicting events before sight confirmed them. Listening became as essential as seeing or touching. The ship was a living partner. Its creaks, vibrations, and movements dictated behavior. Men instinctively timed actions with the roll, sway, and pitch. Survival depended as much on understanding the vessel as on enduring the sea. Space enforced adaptation and tolerance. Narrow passageways, tightly packed hammocks, and shared work areas forced proximity. Heat, moisture, and contact were constant. Privacy vanished. Cooperation became necessary not only for comfort but for survival. Sleep was fragmented and shallow. Hammocks swung, bodies jostled, and dreams blended with memory and fear. Waking was abrupt, reflexive, and necessary. Rest was functional rather than restorative, a brief pause in the ongoing demands of life below deck. Vermin thrived as constant companions. Rats and fleas gnawed, scuttled, and startled. They were nuisances but also environmental indicators. Spoiled food, moisture, or structural issues. Some men accepted them, even finding strange reassurance in their presence. Superstition influenced routine. Whistling, careless words, and mistied knots were avoided. Charms, rituals, and omens offered reassurance and psychological stability. Even minimal belief provided a sense of control in a life dictated by uncertainty. Fear and courage coexisted. Fear of illness, hunger, injury, and confinement was constant. Courage manifested quietly in daily endurance, maintaining equipment, completing tasks, and waking each day to face the same challenges. Heroism was unremarkable, measured by reliability and resilience rather than spectacle. Time became abstract. Days blurred into nights, weeks into months. Men marked time through chores, meals, and environmental cues. The present moment became essential, grounding survival in the here and now. Small comforts were treasured. A dry cloth, warmth from a hammock, a whispered joke, or a brief moment of light grounded men in reality. These small reprieves preserved humanity in the relentless conditions below deck. Below deck, bodies strengthened, minds sharpened, and endurance deepened. Life became inseparable from the rhythm of ship, sea, and necessity. Survival was quiet, persistent, and uncelebrated, yet undeniable, carried forward across endless waves. Below deck, monotony and endurance intertwined. Days began in cramped hammocks, with bodies pressed together, and continued with repetitive chores: coiling rope, stacking barrels, scrubbing decks, cleaning weapons. Each action, though seemingly mundane, was essential. Mistakes could lead to injury, wasted resources, or even danger. Over time, veterans moved with fluid precision, their bodies aligned with the ship's motion, while newcomers struggled to keep pace. Darkness dominated perception. Oil lamps flickered, shadows danced along walls and barrels, and slivers of moonlight occasionally slipped through deck seams. Every surface and corner became memorized. Eyes adjusted to low light, learning to detect movement over detail. Missteps, stubbed toes, scraped hands, bruised shins, served as constant reminders of the need for vigilance. Temperature extremes shaped life. Tropic heat clung to skin, saturating clothing with sweat, exhausting muscles and slowing reflexes. Northern cold seeped through layers, stiffening joints and compelling men to share warmth in tight hammocks. Bodies adapted gradually, learning to endure discomfort while maintaining function. Food dictated social dynamics as much as survival. Hardtack, salted meat, and dried legumes dominated rations. Portion control was crucial. Sharing was rare and meaningful. Hunger sharpened attention, reinforced hierarchy, and subtly influenced behavior. Crew members who managed rations wisely earned quiet respect, while greed or waste provoked judgment and tension. Hygiene was minimal. Hair became tangled, beards thickened, and skin collected layers of sweat, salt, and grime. Lice, fleas, and other vermin thrived. Scratching and irritation became routine. Men endured, prioritizing survival, work, and vigilance over cleanliness. Illness spread quickly and silently. Scurvy, dysentery, fevers, and infections preyed on bodies weakened by diet, exposure, and fatigue. Symptoms were often concealed, as weakness could compromise status or safety. Treatments were rudimentary: alcohol, herbs, and crude surgical interventions. Death was quiet, unnoticed, yet impactful on morale and the remaining crew. Noise became critical. Footsteps, groans, and the scrape of rope conveyed information. Silence indicated watchfulness, illness, or tension. Men honed their hearing, interpreting subtle auditory cues to anticipate danger, movement, or events before seeing them. The ship itself was alive. Creaks, vibrations, and sway dictated timing and motion. Men adapted instinctively, integrating their movements with the vessel's rhythm. Survival depended as much on understanding the ship as enduring the sea. Space enforced cooperation. Hammocks and work areas were cramped, forcing close proximity. Heat, moisture, and physical contact were unavoidable. Privacy vanished. Social adaptation became as essential as physical skill. Sleep was fragmented and irregular. Hammocks swayed with every wave. Dreams merged with memory, anticipation, and fear. Waking was abrupt and reflexive. Rest was functional, brief, and never fully restorative. Vermin thrived, rats, fleas, and other pests gnawed, scuttled, and startled men. While nuisances, they also served as indicators of food spoilage, leaks, or structural issues. Some men tolerated them. Others found strange comfort in their constant presence. Superstition governed behavior. Whistling, careless words, and mistied knots were avoided. Charms, rituals, and omens offered reassurance and structure. Even minimal belief provided psychological stability in an unpredictable environment. Fear and courage were inseparable. Fear of injury, illness, hunger, or confinement was constant. Courage manifested quietly, performing duties, enduring discomfort, maintaining equipment, and facing each day. Heroism was subtle, measured by persistence and reliability rather than dramatic deeds. Time became abstract. Days blurred into nights. Weeks merged into months. Men measured time through chores, meals, and environmental cues. Present moment awareness anchored survival. Small comforts held profound significance. A dry cloth, warmth from a hammock, a shared joke, or a fleeting glimpse of light. These moments preserved humanity amidst relentless conditions. Below deck, bodies strengthened, minds sharpened, and endurance deepened. Life became inseparable from the rhythm of ship, sea, and necessity. Survival persisted quietly, uncelebrated, yet undeniable, carried across endless waves. Below deck, monotony and adaptation defined existence. Each day followed a similar repetitive rhythm. Waking in cramped hammocks, performing chores, eating minimal rations, and enduring discomfort. Repetition trained the body and mind. Veterans moved instinctively, navigating the narrow, shifting environment, while newcomers stumbled, bruised, or scraped as they adjusted to the constant motion and confinement. Darkness was a constant companion. Oil lamps flickered, casting uncertain shadows across barrels, beams, and hammocks. Slivers of moonlight seeped through cracks, briefly illuminating familiar shapes. Men memorized every corner, obstruction, and surface. Eyes adjusted to low light, learning to detect movement instead of detail. Missteps, stubbed toes, scraped hands, bruised shins, reminded men that vigilance was life-saving. Temperature extremes dictated behavior. Tropical heat left bodies drenched, clothing stuck, and muscles fatigued. Northern cold penetrated layers, stiffening joints, and forcing men to share warmth in cramped hammocks. The body adapted slowly, learning to endure discomfort while remaining functional. Adaptation was both physical and psychological. Food dictated hierarchy and survival. Hardtack, salted meat, and dried legumes were staples. Portions were measured carefully, rationed strictly. Sharing was rare but meaningful. Hunger sharpened perception, reinforced social order, and influenced interactions. Those who managed supplies wisely earned quiet respect. Those who wasted or hoarded were judged subtly but decisively. Hygiene was minimal. Hair tangled, beards thickened, and skin accumulated layers of sweat, salt, and grime. Lice, fleas, and scabs were ever present. Men learned to endure irritation, focusing on essential survival tasks rather than cleanliness. Adaptation meant prioritizing functional health over comfort. Illness spread silently below deck. Scurvy, dysentery, fevers, and infections thrived in close quarters. Weakness was often hidden to avoid judgment or social vulnerability. Treatments were rudimentary: alcohol, herbs, or crude surgery. Death came quietly, unnoticed by some, yet it subtly altered the rhythm and morale of the crew. Noise conveyed critical information. Footsteps, groans, or the scrape of rope indicated movement, danger, or urgency. Silence often meant illness or vigilance. Men became attuned to subtle sounds, predicting events before seeing them. Auditory awareness became as important as sight or touch. The ship itself was alive. Its creaks, vibrations, and rolling dictated motion, timing, and attention. Men instinctively adapted, moving in rhythm with the vessel. Survival required not just skill but harmony with the ship. Confined spaces forced cooperation. Hammocks and work areas were tight. Heat, moisture, and contact were unavoidable. Privacy disappeared. Social adaptation became as crucial as physical skill, and small gestures of respect or tolerance reinforced daily survival. Sleep was fragmented and shallow. Hammocks swung with every wave. Dreams mingled with memory, fear, and anticipation. Waking was abrupt and reflexive. Rest was functional rather than restorative, essential for enduring the relentless routine. Vermin were constant. Rats, fleas, and insects gnawed and startled. Though nuisances, they also indicated spoiled food, moisture, or structural shifts. Some men accepted them. Others found comfort in their persistent presence. Superstition influenced behavior subtly. Whistling, careless words, and mistied knots were avoided. Charms, rituals, and beliefs provided psychological stability. Even minimal faith helped men maintain a sense of control in a largely uncontrollable environment. Fear and courage coexisted. Fear of injury, illness, hunger, or confinement was constant. Courage manifested quietly in daily endurance, performing tasks, maintaining equipment, and rising each day. Heroism was understated, measured in persistence and reliability rather than spectacle. Time became abstract. Days merged with nights, weeks with months. Men marked time by meals, chores, or environmental cues. The present moment anchored survival. Small comforts were treasured: a dry cloth, warmth from a hammock, a whispered joke, or a rare glimmer of light. These moments preserved humanity amid relentless conditions. Below deck, bodies strengthened, minds sharpened, and endurance deepened. Life became inseparable from the rhythm of ship, sea, and necessity. Survival endured quietly, persistently, and without recognition, carried forward across endless waves. Below deck, life was defined by repetition, endurance, and adaptation. Each day began in cramped hammocks, continued with chores, meals, and the constant navigation of confined spaces. Every action, coiling rope, stacking barrels, scrubbing decks, cleaning weapons, was repeated so often that veterans performed them instinctively. Newcomers struggled, often bruised or scraped, learning the rhythm and layout of the ship through experience and minor injuries. Darkness governed perception. Oil lamps flickered, casting unsteady shadows, while moonlight filtered through cracks in the deck, briefly illuminating familiar obstacles. Every surface, beam, and corner became memorized. Eyes adjusted to low light, reading movement over detail. Missteps, stubbed toes, cuts, bruises, served as reminders of the constant need for vigilance. Temperature extremes shaped behavior and survival. Tropical heat clung to the skin, saturated clothing, and exhausted muscles. Northern cold penetrated layers, stiffening joints, and forcing men to share warmth in cramped hammocks. The body adapted gradually, muscles strengthening, reflexes sharpening, tolerance for discomfort deepening. Food dictated hierarchy and daily routines. Hardtack, salted meat, and dried legumes formed the staple diet. Rations were carefully measured, shared sparingly. Hunger sharpened awareness and reinforced subtle social structures. Those who managed provisions wisely gained unspoken respect, while hoarding or wasting food drew quiet disapproval. Hygiene was minimal. Hair tangled, beards thickened, and skin accumulated sweat, salt, and grime. Lice, fleas, and scabs were ever present. Discomfort was normalized. Men focused on survival and essential tasks, adapting to the persistent challenges of filth and infestation. Illness spread efficiently. Scurvy, dysentery, fevers, and infections preyed on weakened bodies. Symptoms were often hidden. Weakness could compromise status or safety. Treatments were rudimentary. Alcohol, herbs, crude surgical interventions. Death was quiet, unnoticed at times, yet its presence shaped routines and morale. Noise carried meaning. Footsteps, groans, or rope scraping indicated movement, danger, or urgency. Silence could signal illness, watchfulness, or tension. Men became attuned to subtle auditory cues, predicting events before visual confirmation. Listening became a crucial survival skill. The ship itself was alive. Creaks, vibrations, and swaying dictated timing, movement, and awareness. Men adjusted instinctively, synchronizing with the vessel's rhythm. Survival depended on understanding and cooperating with the ship as much as enduring the sea. Confined spaces required adaptation. Hammocks and work areas were tight. Heat, moisture, and proximity were unavoidable. Privacy vanished. Cooperation and tolerance became essential social tools, sustaining morale and function. Sleep was irregular, shallow, and fragmented. Hammocks swung with every wave. Dreams mingled with memory, fear, and anticipation. Waking was abrupt, reflexive, and necessary. Rest was functional, never fully restorative, yet essential for continued survival. Vermin thrived. Rats, fleas, and other pests gnawed, scuttled, and startled. Though unwelcome, they indicated environmental conditions. Spoiled food, moisture, or structural weaknesses. Adaptation included tolerance of their presence, sometimes even finding reassurance in their constant activity. Superstition subtly influenced behavior. Whistling, careless words, and mistied knots were avoided. Charms, rituals, and omens provided psychological stability, reinforcing a sense of control in a world dominated by uncertainty. Fear and courage coexisted intimately. Fear of injury, illness, hunger, confinement was ever present. Courage manifested quietly, performing tasks, maintaining weapons, enduring discomfort, and continuing daily routines. Heroism was understated, measured by persistence, reliability, and resilience. Time became abstract. Days merged into nights. Weeks blurred into months. Men measured time through meals, chores, and environmental cues. Present moment awareness became critical to survival. Small comforts were cherished. A dry cloth, warmth in a hammock, a shared joke, or a fleeting glimmer of light. These brief moments of relief grounded men in humanity amid relentless challenges. Below deck, bodies toughened, minds sharpened, and endurance deepened. Life became inseparable from the ship's rhythm, the sea's motion, and the necessity of survival. Human resilience persisted quietly, uncelebrated, yet undeniable, as the vessel pressed onward through endless waves. As we reach the final layers of life below deck, the scene settles into a quiet, enduring rhythm. Darkness stretches across every corner, broken only by the occasional flicker of an oil lamp or the subtle glow of the moon through deck cracks. The ship hums and creaks, its timbre as familiar to the crew as their own heartbeat. Every sound, every vibration, every movement has a meaning. Men move instinctively, bodies attuned to the rhythm of the vessel. Sleep is still fragmented, hammocks swinging with each roll, dreams weaving through memory, anticipation, and faint fear. Waking is sudden yet necessary. Bodies stiff from hours of motion, and constriction adjust immediately. Muscles coiled and ready. The mind, sharpened by constant awareness, reads the environment, tracking the subtle shifts of the ship and the faintest indications of weather, danger, or change. Food remains meager, yet each meal is a moment of reprieve. Hardtack, salted meat, and dried legumes sustain the body while camaraderie offers the soul a brief solace. Sharing, when it happens, carries weight, an unspoken signal of trust and connection in a world otherwise defined by scarcity. Hygiene and comfort remain secondary. Hair, beards, and skin bear the weight of salt, sweat, and persistent vermin. Men tolerate the incessant gnawing of rats and fleas, the discomfort of heat, cold, and cramped spaces. Adaptation has become instinct. Bodies and minds have learned to endure, finding equilibrium in discomfort. Illness, ever present, claims some quietly. Scurvy, fevers, and dysentery pass through like unseen shadows. Treatments are rudimentary. Death is silent, yet life continues. Courage manifests in persistence, in rising each day despite fatigue, pain, or fear. Heroism is measured in endurance, reliability, and quiet resilience rather than grand gestures. The ship itself remains a constant companion. Every groan of timber, sway of rigging, and ripple against the hull informs action. Men respond instinctively, aligning themselves with its movements, listening to its language, moving as if they are extensions of the vessel itself. Survival is interwoven with the ship, dependent on its integrity as much as on human perseverance. Time has long become abstract. Days blur into nights, weeks fold into months, yet the crew marks passage with small indicators. A change in wind, a shared meal, the creak of a beam. Present moment awareness is survival itself, anchoring men in the unbroken rhythm of existence below deck. Small comforts carry profound significance. The warmth of a hammock, the dryness of a patch of cloth, a whispered joke, or the fleeting glow of a lamp becomes grounding, a reminder of humanity within the relentless isolation. Even in the harshest conditions, these fragments of normalcy anchor men to life and memory, bridging the gap between endurance and spirit. Now, as you imagine the quiet below deck, feel the sway of the ship beneath your own body. Hear the creak of timbers and the faint murmur of the crew. Close your eyes and take a deep, slow breath. Let the rhythm of the sea, the timeless echo of human endurance, and the persistence of life in confined spaces settle your mind. You are now part of the story, carried on the waves, immersed in the calm and hardship of a world far removed yet intimately human. The ship continues onward, and so does life below deck, unceasing, quiet, resilient, and alive. The story lingers in your mind like the faint scent of salt and tar, the soft groan of wood, the warmth of shared hammocks. You breathe slowly, feel the motion, and let the enduring spirit of those who lived here rest within you.